Who is the naked man in the crater? I'm sure you have theories, and we do too. Amazon's new series, The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, is here, and with it comes an elven shipload of lore, characters, and questions that need answering.
Questions that need answering.
Welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed in the premiere of the new prequel series, The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. First and foremost, you may be wondering which of J.R.R. Tolkien's books provide the basis for this series.
Did they take the lore from the Silmarillion, or possibly the Unfinished Tales?
Neither, Doug. Amazon doesn't have the rights to either of those books. They only have the rights to The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit.
So how is this show able to access that lore?
Well, Tolkien ran down the general events of the First and Second Ages of Middle-earth and the lengthy appendices that can be found at the end of Return of the King. This series uses that as a template, and a lot of lore has been invented by the makers of this series. That invented lore, for the most part, fills in the gaps that Tolkien left open-ended. The rights issue is likely why the show only references First Age material and references that can also be found within The Lord of the Rings. There's also no mention whatsoever of the Silmarils, and while Morgoth is mentioned, his original name, Melkor, is not found. None of the specific names of the Valar are mentioned either, even though the land of Valinor is able to be referenced and seen.
Yeah, do I gotta read a lot of Tolkien to understand this show?
Not really.
Do I need to watch the 2 Peter Jackson movie trilogies?
Maybe not, but it would help. Jackson and company did not work on this show, but the design, storytelling, and world building complement his movies in a number of ways. The premiere almost plays more like a prequel to Jackson's movies than an adaptation of Tolkien's writing.
I am a servant of the secret fire.
We begin with Galadriel as we did in the movie The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring.
Much that once was is lost.
Now, it's fitting that we begin once more with Galadriel's voice in the dark.
Nothing is evil in the beginning.
Played by Cate Blanchett in Jackson's movies, the eventual Lady of Lorien is mostly played here by Morfydd Clark. Though Galadriel plays a part in Tolkien's First and Second Ages, she's hardly a lead character. However, she is a touchstone character that modern audiences are already familiar with, and she's a character that Amazon has the rights to. So it makes sense that she provides our new entry into this new story. Though there's nothing evil in the beginning, the series shows us many instances of decay, with evil slowly taking root as well as evil laying dormant and waiting to strike. It's the First Age, and we haven't even gone to Middle-earth yet. We're in Valinor, which is where the Valar, that's the gods of Tolkien's work, first took form and set down roots. It's where the elves were first created, and it's sometimes referred to as the Undying Lands. Whenever we see elves departing Middle-earth on ships, this is the land that they are returning to. At the end of Return of the King, Galadriel, Gandalf, and Elrond all take one of these ships to Valinor. Because of their importance in the events of the Third Age, Bilbo Baggins is permitted to go, and so is Frodo Baggins. In Tolkien's lore, Elvenlord and Galadriel's husband Celeborn eventually follows. Now, at the very end of his long and wonderful life, Samwise Gamgee is permitted to take one of the last ships to Valinor. Aside from the fact that the One Ring would have never been destroyed without him, he technically was a ring bearer for a short amount of time. This is where the elves began, and it is where they return. Every now and then, a special exception is made for a non-elf to make this journey.
Would I be invited?
Of course you would, buddy. Now, because of this, ships and ship imagery are a big deal for the elves, and so is the sea. In the Third Age, Galadriel would warn Legolas of the call of the sea, and he himself hears its call beckoning him later on. Elrond makes it clear what the call of the sea is in the Return of the King movie, saying to Bilbo, as I said, Valinor is the ultimate home of all elves, a blessed, heaven-like realm.
Yarkan Ven Namar.
Young Galadriel is seen making a little paper boat, one that becomes a swan-shaped ship.
Not going to float. It's going to sail.
This is a sign of how Galadriel herself will blossom into a more powerful being. Also, most elvish ships take a similar shape. The ship that Galadriel leaves on in Return of the King does, as does this little skiff that she rides on in Fellowship. This episode itself features a ship of similar design. Other young elves throw rocks at Galadriel's little paper boat, eventually sinking it. Now, this symbolizes the constant infighting of the elves during this time. They were rarely at peace with one another, with the various houses of elves often vying for power and control. It's about as close to getting into the Silmarillion territory as this show can go. Galadriel's paper boat being sunk and going underwater may also be a harbinger of her jumping ship towards the end of the episode. The show doesn't name Galadriel's brother, but he is almost certainly Finrod of House Finarfin. His wisdom about the difference between a stone and a ship is something Galadriel turns into a way of life. The stone succumbs to the darkness, but the ship looks up. It might be tempted by the darkness, but it looks to the light. It thinks of things that the darkness can never know. Has Galadriel ever been tempted by the darkness? Well, she will be later on in life, that's for sure.
All shall love me and despair.
As for things that the darkness can never truly conceive of, try kindness and small acts of love, something that Gandalf tells Galadriel in the first Hobbit film.
Simple acts of kindness and love.
That's really the entire basis for Gandalf's Fool's Hope, and it turned out just fine. Now, like Galadriel, Finrod is an elf of Noldor. In Tolkien's writing, he played a much larger role in the First Age than Galadriel did. He was close with both the dwarves and the men once he came to Middle-earth, and he founded the kingdom of Nargothrond. His skill at carving out this location earned him the surname Felagund from the dwarves, which means hewer of caves. He had a friendship with Barahir of the House Beor, and he gave him a ring after Barahir saved his life. Now that ring became an heirloom of that house, eventually winding up with Aragorn. The Ring of Barahir is how Saruman was able to identify who Aragorn was in the Two Towers movie.
Ring of Barahir. So Gandalf Greyheim thinks he has found Isildur's heir.
Finrod battled Sauron personally in the First Age, and Sauron prevailed. Finrod perished while saving Beren, the son of Barahir. Now Beren is a First Age legend in his own right, a man who earned the great love of the elf Luthien Tinuviel. Now Beren and Luthien were a man and an elf that fell in love, so naturally both Aragorn and Arwen reference them ages later. The union of Luthien and Beren resulted in Dior, and she gave birth to Elrond. This is why Elrond is sometimes referred to as half-elven. Unlike Galadriel, Elrond was born in Middle-earth, but more on him later. So when Galadriel asks her brother about how she can know which lights to follow, he whispers in her ear. Now we don't yet know what he says, but this entire conversation about deciding for yourself, as well as Finrod saying he'll not always be there, immediately made us think of something that Frodo once asked Gandalf.
Who then do I trust?
You must trust yourself. Trust your own strength.
Finrod references his and Galadriel's parents, and though the show doesn't name them, they were named Finarfin and Eowyn. The two trees that we see in Valinor are Laurelin, the gold tree, and Telperion, the silver tree. They were both poisoned by the fallen Valar Melkor and the giant spider Ungoliant. Melkor eventually became Sauron's boss, renamed Morgoth, and Ungoliant spawned all of the evil spiders seen in the rest of Tolkien's work, including Shelob. The trees couldn't be salvaged, so the Valar harvested what they could. Telperion's last flower became the moon, and Laurelin's last fruit became the sun. It was said that following this event, the true light of the trees could only ever be seen in the Silmarils. These are the beautiful shining gems of the First Age. Now, there was a Valar known as Yavanna who did create a second version of Telperion, and the seedlings of that tree eventually find its way through the lore all the way to Gondor in the Third Age. The white tree of Minas Tirith is its descendant. In the movies, the health of the tree symbolizes the health of Gondor and the king's potential return.
They guard it because they have hope. Faint and fading hope that one day it will flower. The king will come.
But in the book, the tree is dead. Gandalf and Aragorn have to take a journey out to find a lost seedling so that another tree in the same line can grow. We do see something dark and sinister spreading throughout the trees, and this could be a reference to Melkor and Ungoliant's poison. There are other moments in the episode where a similar poison is shown. A leaf becomes corrupted in a similar way, foreshadowing the doom ahead, and then we have a black bile pouring out of a cow's udder. Evil has been lying in wait, but the poison has been released. So, the show skips Melkor and just makes him Morgoth from the outset. He finishes off the trees and flees to launch havoc on a place Galadriel calls Middle-earth, one that she tells us has
strange creatures beyond count.
So we've heard that before.
Middle-earth being, after all, full of strange creatures beyond count.
The elves proceed to follow Morgoth en masse, which turns into a complete truncation of the back-and-forth travel that the elves did in this age. It involved, as I've said, a great deal of elvish infighting. I mean, the broad strokes are there throughout. The elves got to Middle-earth and went to war with Morgoth. The brief scene of the War of the Wrath that the series shows us is a fleeting glimpse of the size and enormity of this conflict. It makes the War of the Ring look like something out of a lesser Real Housewives episode.
But it is not this day!
Camille's friends are combating me!
We do see several dragons, and one of them is likely Calagon the Black, the largest dragon to ever exist. He was bred personally by Morgoth, and with a host of fire drakes behind him, and Calagon personally drove the Valar themselves back when they eventually got involved personally. Now, Morgoth's use of Calagon was likely remembered by the Valar and the Mayor, that's the wizards in Middle-earth, and therefore it would be remembered by Gandalf. This would be why he has a much larger concern about Smaug in the time of the Hobbit.
A dragon could be used to terrible effect.
So, what took an age for Tolkien takes seconds for the series, but Galadriel does tell us that the war lasted for centuries and
Left Middle-earth in ruin.
The elves of this show didn't have a word for death, but now they have many. Morgoth is defeated, but his orcs are spread to all corners of the land, led by his most loyal lieutenant, the cruel and cunning Sauron.
They called him Sauron.
The design of Sauron is mostly in line with what we see of him in the Fellowship of the Ring. Finrod dies trying to destroy Sauron, which tracks with Finrod's history that we mentioned earlier. Galadriel assumes responsibility for her brother's quest.
His vow became mine.
Sauron killed her brother, so now this is personal. She takes her brother's knife as a physical symbol of her vow. A mark is left on Finrod's body, and this is the first of many times we'll see this symbol in this episode. To us, it looks a lot like the Eye of Sauron. Tolkien wrote that even though Finrod's mortal body perished in Middle-earth, he reincarnated and came back to life in Valinor, where he remained until the end of his days. That's not in the show, but it's nice to know.
I feel better about all of this.
Galadriel's quest to find Sauron goes on for a long time.
Year gave way to year. Century gave way to century.
She sums up the time as only Galadriel can.
History became legend. Legend became myth.
Most of the elves now believe that Sauron is gone for good, and Galadriel has to fight that complacency. It's not the first time in her life that she'll do this. It's not even the first time in this episode. She knows that Sauron is patient and proficient with a slow and poisonous needle. Before you even know anything is wrong, your leaves are rotting and your cow is sick. Galadriel eventually winds up at Forodwaith, the frozen area in the northernmost waste that was greatly affected by the evil cold of Morgoth. In the Unfinished Tales, Tolkien wrote about the men who lived in this area, that they could slide on the ice by tying bones to their feet. And that's one way to win the gold. Galadriel is depicted as an armor-clad commander, which seems like a departure, but is supported by Tolkien. He described her as looking on things with the eye of a commander. But more than that, he wrote about her leading armies personally on more than one occasion. She is even described by him as a warrior and an Amazon in the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. So this depiction is nowhere near as far-fetched as it may initially seem. She is never convinced that the evil of Morgoth is gone, and the evil code of Forodwaith supports her belief. She's not convinced that Sauron is gone either, and neither is Gandalf much later in the Third Age. This is likely why the White Council scene in the first Hobbit movie shows her supporting Gandalf when he's trying to fight the complacency of Saruman.
Always you must meddle, looking for trouble where none exists.
Let him speak.
Now, though the chainmail she wears is not exactly cheery, it is adorned with little golden stars which remind her and us to look to the light. The light of the stars is sacred to all elves, but this could also represent the fight against the fallen stars of Morgoth and Sauron. It could also foreshadow the star that comes zooming in at the end of the episode. The design of the swords that Galadriel's small company use are also familiar, as their lengths and handles make us recall Narsi, eventually reforged as Anduril and wielded by Aragorn. The stronghold that they find looks a lot like Sauron's auxiliary fortress of Dol Guldur, seen in the Hobbit trilogy. Within, the elves are affected by the cold remnants of Morgoth's magic. Galadriel briefly sees her own reflection in ice, which references a different mirror that Galadriel would later use in Fellowship.
Will you look into the mirror?
What will I see?
Even the wisest cannot tell.
Another Fellowship connection follows as one of Galadriel's company asks,
What devilry is this?
We instantly thought of Boromir in a similar line.
What is this new devilry?
Galadriel determines that the magic at play has something to do with this unseen world, which in Tolkien's writing is a plane which contains creatures and beings having to do with magic. The ringwraiths are of the unseen world, and the powers of the One Ring are tied to it as well. Whatever research was being done in this fortress could very well have to do with the magic that creates the 9 rings for mortal men, which resulted in the creation of the ringwraiths and could also potentially be related to the craft behind the One Ring itself. If we need proof that Sauron was involved in whatever was going on here, Galadriel finds it. Despite the evil cold, a metal surface that looks an awful lot like an anvil still burns hot. When touched with water, the Eye of Sauron is seen once more, this time burning with fire. It's similar to this truth about the One Ring.
A secret now that only fire can tell.
Now, just a reminder that this show will feature Sauron co-creating the Rings of Power with a character that we'll meet later in the episode. Whatever dark tricks Sauron personally adds may have been tested in this creepy-ass forge, but all Galadriel knows right now is that Sauron was here, and even though the mark is centuries old, he's probably now somewhere else.
Gathering strength, perfecting whatever dark art eluded him here.
The dark art in question surely involves rings. All he needs is an elvish dupe to give him an assist. So Galadriel's followers aren't as committed committed as she is, and they long to go home. Now, so does she, but she's not talking about the same place they are. She describes still feeling the light of the trees, so the home she speaks of is Valinor.
Every trace of our enemy is vanquished. I can never return.
Morgoth, his orcs, and Sauron all have to be confirmed dead before she'll return home, even though she'd probably love to cut bait and go back right now. And we know this isn't going to happen anytime soon because it's going to take a long time for Sauron to be defeated. But once he is, she does indeed get to return. But that's at least an age away, so
Not yet.
the fight with the snow troll reminded us of this. In more than one way, not least was Galadriel running up a sword to the troll's back, just like Legolas ran up a chain. The design of the elven bows is familiar too, as they remind us of Haldir's noble contingent of archers from this scene in the Two Towers. Galadriel pulls another Legolas move when she finishes the troll off with her brother's knife. So when Galadriel's band decides that they're done and that she's alone, we can't help but wonder where her husband is. Where is Celeborn?
Tell me, where is Gandalf? For I much desire to speak with him.
They are married at this point. That happened in the First Age. Either he's off getting a really important Brazilian, or the show's going to change their romantic history. Big map flyovers are a staple of the movies.
Bag End, Bagshot Row, Hobbiton, Westfarthing, the Shire.
So naturally, they continue to be used on this series. Our first map stop is Rhovanion. This is an area that the river Anduin flows through and encompasses much of the Greenwood. That's the great forest that would eventually become Mirkwood, which we saw in The Hobbit. Two men with big moose antlers on their back pass through, and they're on guard against dangerous creatures called Harfoots. And once they're gone, the Harfoots start to pop out of the grass and the trees and everywhere else.
Hobbits?
Close, but not quite, Doug. These folk haven't yet taken that name. Harfoots are one of the three breeds of halfling, the other being Stors and the Falahides. There's almost nothing relating to hobbits or Harfoots in Tolkien's writing about the Second Age. They came to prominence in the Third Age, when the Harfoots settled what would become the Shire.
And yes, no doubt to others our ways seem quaint.
Along with the Falahides and some of the Stors. It bears mentioning that many Stors were river folk staying close to the Anduin. Countless years after the One Ring is lost, one particular Stor hobbit named Deagol finds it. Deagol's cousin and best friend, another Stor, murders him and takes it. That Stor went by the name Smeagol, also known as Gollum. The Harfoots are adept at burrowing into the ground like the hobbits will eventually do, but they are far more earthy. They're almost like hobbits, crossed with a bit of the Fae and a smattering of the Gelfling from the Dark Crystal. They are very wary of the big folk who pass by. They may start here,
Clear.
but they'll eventually get here.
You bow to no one.
The Harfoots have a mysticism about them that the hobbits do not have later on, most of it provided by Sadok Burrows, who tries to interpret the appearance of the hunters. It should be noted that he is played by the legendary Lenny Henry, who recently voiced the character of Martin Tinbones in The Sandman. All of the Harfoot characters have been completely invented for this show. Eleanor Nori Brandyfoot comes close to being Tookish in nature.
Fool of a took.
As she is adventurous and doesn't ask for permission. The name Brandyfoot is also a cross between familiar hobbit names Brandybuck and Proudfoot. And the nickname Nori is the same as one of the dwarves in the company of Thorin Oakenshield in The Hobbit. When a friend tells Nori that they aren't supposed to be out this far, she has a very Tookish response.
If we didn't do everything we weren't supposed to do, we'd hardly do anything at all.
She's not as wary as Samwise Gamgee is about going out too far.
If I take one more step, it'll be the farthest away from home I've ever been.
Just like the hobbits, the Harfoots enjoy living off the land, dancing around, and living their peaceful life. But they aren't immune to the dangers of Middle-earth, as they have yet to settle the protected borders of the Shire. An appearance of what looks to be a warg lets us know why they are told to not venture too far off. We then meet the familiar Elrond, played by Hugo Weaving in the movies, but is now played by Robert Aramayo, who appeared as the young Ned Stark in Game of Thrones. He's addressed as Herald Elrond because he is the herald of the High King Gil-galad, who we see fighting in the Battle of the Last Alliance in the Fellowship prologue. Remember that Elrond was there too. Here we find him writing in a familiar Elvish script used by both Tolkien himself and in the movies. He's told that he is not invited to a council meeting, which is ironic given that Elrond will be summoning his own councils in an age or so.
Friends of old, you've been summoned here to answer the threat of Mordor.
He's told that this session is for elf lords only, which may be a dig at Elrond's half-elven status, which we mentioned earlier. So this takes place in Lindon, the capital city of the High Elves in this period. The design of Lindon is similar to both the designs of Lothlorien and Rivendell in the movies, though in this time period neither location has even been built. In front of a mural depicting ships crossing back to Valinor, Elrond meets with Galadriel, who is no longer in her armor. Not only are these two friends, they eventually become family in Tolkien's writing. Elrond marries Celebrian, a daughter of Galadriel and Celeborn. Among the children he has with her is, of course, Arwen.
I would rather share one lifetime with you than face all the ages of this world alone.
Now, it doesn't seem like any of this has happened yet, so maybe this series will show us little baby Arwen. Elrond talks to Galadriel and elf-splains the mural.
Here it's said that when you cross over, you hear a song,
which may echo the Call of the Sea notion that we previously spoke of. What Elrond has heard of this crossing will be proved true by the end of this episode, as the call to home is strong. The imagery is different, but it's a similar sentiment to the lyrics of Into the West, which ended Return of the King. Gandalf's words to Pippin during the Siege of Gondor also come to mind.
No, the journey doesn't end here.
Now, speaking of Gandalf, Galadriel's connection to him is drawn even further here. Elrond half expected Galadriel to arrive caked in grime, and he gives a similar dig to Gandalf in the first Hobbit movie.
Not really dressed for dinner.
You never are.
Gandalf has always been a field man, and Galadriel has now proven herself a field elf. Also, like Gandalf, Galadriel is ready to go out again as soon as possible, prompting Elrond to reply,
"You have only just arrived."
He sounds like Frodo Baggins.
You've only just arrived.
When Elrond presses Galadriel for details on her journey, she remarks that,
You really have become a politician.
and she's more right than she knows, as we'll come to find out by episode's end. Galadriel has more in common with Nori Brandyfoot than one might think, as both of them defy orders and go as far as they think they must. Galadriel is now consumed with the quest to find Sauron, and has no problems going against Gil-galad's orders to do what needs to be done. The only consequence for Nori is that she missed the sighting of the hunters, and her father's advice to her is to stay close to home so she doesn't miss anything. It's the reverse of Bilbo Baggins, because if he'd stayed close to home, he would have missed quite a lot. Instead,
I'm going on an adventure!
Nori, more than any of the other Harfoots, definitely has some Took instincts inside of her. She wants to go out and see what wonders the world has in store, danger be damned.
Haven't you ever wondered what else is out there? How far the river flows, or where the sparrows learn the new songs they sing in spring?
Her mother lists off the various races of Middle-earth and what they have to worry about, including dwarves, who we don't meet in this episode, but we will in the weeks ahead. And she includes trees on this list. They have to worry about the soil beneath their roots, and this could be a reference to the Horns, Ents, or both.
My business is with Isengard tonight.
She adds that they are safe because they have each other, and that's a Hobbit sentiment if I ever heard one.
I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you!
Gil-galad celebrates Galadriel and her warriors, saying that their search has proven that Sauron is gone and that the days of war are over. After a familiar close-up of Galadriel's eyes, he tells the group that they will receive a great honor. They will be allowed to take a ship from the Grey Havens and depart for Valinor. Galadriel is going to truly go home, and everyone is happy except for her. Her mission is far from over, and she knows it. A fireworks celebration that night doesn't really hold a candle to what Gandalf would do. Elrond tells her that getting to leave is a gift, which echoes Tolkien's writing in Return of the King, when Arwen passes this gift to Frodo. Galadriel rejects the gift here for different reasons, but it mirrors the choice that her granddaughter, and Elrond's daughter, will one day make. When Elrond says that no one has ever refused the call before, he has no idea what's to come. And this isn't the first time that Elrond will be convincing someone to change their mind and get on a boat.
I have made my choice.
Now, he tells her that he's shown the sigil that Galadriel found to Gil-galad, but neither of them think that it's a big deal. They think that she is conflicted, and she remarks,
I am grateful you have not known evil as I have.
Now, that line will soon prove pivotal to her journey. Already, Galadriel is the one who has seen the eye.
One who has seen the eye.
The scene is ultimately a spin on what Elrond will tell Aragorn in the Two Towers. If Arwen takes the ship, she will carry her love for Aragorn to the Undying Lands, and there it will be evergreen.
Let her go. Let her take the ship into the west. Let her bear away her love for you to the Undying Lands. There it will be evergreen.
Here, Galadriel argues that if she takes this unfinished business with her, this evil, that will be evergreen as well. It could poison Valinor, just as Middle-earth has become poisoned. As he does with Arwen in the Two Towers movie, Elrond is able to convince Galadriel to take the ship. Arwen didn't even make it to the Grey Havens before she turned around. So, how far do we think Galadriel is going to get? The magic map then takes us to the final group of characters in this episode's puzzle as we go to the Southlands and enter the world of men. It's not yet entirely clear who these folk are, though one says that they are being lumped in with the people from the East who died off 1,000 years ago. Now this is a reference to the Sothrons, also known as the people of Harad. In Tolkien's writing, they were corrupted by Morgoth very early on, and his shadow never left them. These wicked men, as Tolkien called them, are described as having fought for Morgoth in this series. Now elves are stationed nearby, so they come to check on these people regularly to make sure that they're still in line. The Elvish Watch Warden believes that there is still wickedness in them. Now you'll remember the Haradrim from the movies. They're these people. The elf Arondir checks things out in a tavern, worried about something in the east and the returning motif of things being poisoned. These people have no love for elves, and a charming young man calls him Knife Ears before reminding him that they aren't the same men who caused so much trouble.
Oh, let it go, Knife Ears. The lot you lump us in with died off 1,000 years ago.
The same guy says that one day their true king will return.
Is that a reference to Aragorn or the men in Gondor?
No, Doug, not really. It's definitely not an Aragorn reference, and Gondor does not even exist yet. The men who built Gondor and who are at the head of the family line that results in Aragorn are very much in this series, though they're just not in this episode. This kid may be referring to the men of Numenor, and the show will be introducing some of them shortly. Some of the Numenorians are great. Others, like the kind of person who would mess with elves, as this kid is hoping for, are not so great. You'll see. Arondir meets with his human crush of Bronwyn, a healer who gifts him with Alfirin seeds. She uses them in healing, but in Tolkien's writing, the name itself translates to immortal from the Sindarish elves. It's a flower that Legolas sings of once, liken it to a golden bell. Bronwyn asks if elves have healers, and they do. According to Arondir, they call them artificers. Because elves mostly heal themselves, it is the job of the artificer to render hidden truths as works of beauty. Tolkien wrote of the elf Idris, who once possessed a magical green gem that could grant healing powers. Someone's got to make those donuts, and perhaps it's the job of an artificer. The elf Celebrimbor has been described by Tolkien as an artificer, so file that knowledge away for later. In a surprise to absolutely no one, we find out that Arondir has the hots for Bronwyn. We're told that only twice before has the union between an elf and human ever been attempted.
Who are those two?
Well, the show doesn't tell us, but that's why you got us. I've already mentioned the famous Beren and Luthien, but the second couple referred to here is Tuor and Idril. They are involved in the fall of Gondolin, which takes place in the First Age. Aragorn and Arwen would go on to be the third couple, but that hasn't happened yet. Some don't even count them because Arwen chose a mortal life, but by that logic, you'd have trouble with Beren and Luthien too. We're going to count all of them. Will Arondir and Bronwyn join their ranks? Arondir and his company get word from Gil-galad that the troubles are over and they don't have to keep their watch anymore. They're all being called back. Much like the defiance of both Galadriel and Nori Brandyfoot, Arondir goes to see Bronwyn anyways. They get a good look at the sickened cow who wandered east, and black bile pours out of it. Now while they venture off to investigate, Bronwyn's son gets flack about his father who disappeared while he snoops around for an artifact that he saw. He finds it, and it's the broken hilt of a sword. For one thing, it looks like the evil version of the Shards of Narsil.
Shards of Narsil?
For another, it has the Eye of Sauron on it, obviously infused with evil, and the sigil flames up when the boy looks at it. The evil sigil is beginning to act similarly to the objects that Sauron has touched or corrupted in the movies. It turns out that Elrond and Gil-galad sent Galadriel away on purpose, with Elrond being every bit the politician that Galadriel said he was. They're worried that he would unleash the very evil that she hoped to destroy.
For the same wind that seeks to blow out a fire may also cause its spread.
Gil-galad is under no illusions that Sauron is gone. In fact, quite the contrary. He has a plan, as he and Elrond are the leaders facing a new sunrise. His plan with dealing for Sauron? Lord Celebrimbor, the greatest of the elven smiths. Elrond is told that he's to work with him on a new project.
Or what's the project?
Well, Doug, it is most certainly the creation of the Rings of Power. It's a project that forms the basis for this entire series, and one that will come close to spelling certain doom for Middle-earth. Well done, Gil-galad. Send Galadriel away and give Celebrimbor a grant. Elrond looks a little wary here, and that wariness will only grow until he arrives at this point.
Destroy it!
Galadriel and her warriors have their weapons and armor taken from them, signaling that they can lay down their burdens and prepare for a life of peace. They are stripped down to their underclothes as if they are about to be reborn. Galadriel lets it all go, save for her brother's dagger. She grasps onto this symbol of her vow to take up Finrod's quest before ultimately surrendering it. She hears the call of the sea, but then remembers what her brother whispered to her about the stones and ships, and how to know what lights to follow. And this time, we get to hear his words.
Sometimes we cannot know until we have touched the darkness.
Sauron can take many forms and shapes, and some of them are full of light and beauty. Some of them may even look precious. Celebrimbor will be completely fooled, and likely is fooled already. Galadriel will not be fooled. A star falls and blazes across the sky. Every character we've met sees it, and what looks like a pair of Ents witness it too. The star lands near the Harfoots right as Galadriel jumps off the boat and hits the water, making it seem like they are linked in some way. A leaf falls in Lindon, and a dark corruption is spreading through it. Evil is indeed spreading, but light will theoretically rise to meet it. Nori investigates the giant crater, and there is a naked man at the center of it. Naturally, this is the big question of this episode. Who in the name of Mordor is this guy? He's only called the Stranger in promotional materials. Now, if you'd asked us based on the trailer alone, we'd have said that Sauron could be an option, but this episode makes us think that he is already on the scene in Middle-earth, large and in charge. So our money is going to bet on a different stranger. A wandering stranger. A wandering wizard stranger. We're guessing that this is Gandalf the Grey, despite the fact that this flies right in the face of established Tolkien lore. As Tolkien wrote, the 5 wizards came to Middle-earth in the Third Age, not in the Second Age. They were sent from Valinor by the Valar to counter the already established threat of Sauron. They arrived by ship at the Grey Havens. Saruman, thought to be the greatest of them, came first. Gandalf, thought to be the least of them, came last. This happened after the Battle of the Last Alliance, where this series will likely culminate. This show is compressing timelines left and right, just like the movies did, but still, no matter what age you think you're in, the wizards came after the Battle of the Last Alliance. If you're being strict about the lore, then Gandalf should be nowhere near this show. And anyways, no one can possibly succeed Sir Ian McKellen.
How did I know where to stand? People told me.
Also, unless Gandalf got off the ship at the Grey Havens and was then loaded into a cannon, he never flew across Middle-earth like this stranger does. All that being said, we can definitely see the series tweaking the lore and making this Gandalf's altered origin story. It wouldn't contradict anything that's already been put on film. The Valar would see the re-emergence of Sauron coming, and if Gandalf and the other wizards were meant to counter the threat, then it would almost make more sense for them to show up sooner rather than later. Aside from Gandalf, Sauron's chief enemy is Galadriel. The show has her hitting the water at the same time that the stranger hits the ground. Now, we've drawn many links between Gandalf and Galadriel. So one thing that really puts this theory over the top for us is that he is discovered by the proto-hobbits, Harfoots. Gandalf has a strong attachment to hobbits all across the lore, seeing value and potential in them when no one else does. Gandalf feels more at home in the Shire than anywhere else, and let's remember that the Harfoots are the ones who will eventually settle the Shire. They would be his first family. Harfoots being the ones to find him is almost irresistible. For halflings to be the first denizens of Middle-earth that Gandalf gets to know would honor their bond in a powerful way. So the raging Tolkien purist in us rages at this potential change, but we gotta admit, we don't hate it. We think that we might even like it. Either way, Gandalf himself is the one to perfectly describe the situation at the episode's end.
The board is set. The pieces are moving.
Alright, that was a lot. Thanks for watching the whole video. If you have any questions or comments, let us know in the comments below, or you can @ me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.